These players are more expensive in ESPN drafts than they are anywhere else. I mean, a great example of this is starting off at quarterback. Looking at Patrick Mahomes, he has an ADP of 23 on ESPN, whereas in Yahoo, he goes in the 4th round, ADP 41. Whereas on Sleeper, he goes at the 3-4 turn, ADP 36. And in Underdog drafts, he goes in the middle of the 4th, the end of the 4th. So personally, if I'm drafting on ESPN, I don't necessarily think Mahomes is the direction you should be going it with your quarterback room. Now, what's very interesting is you're going to see some other quarterbacks that are also severely overrated, but it's not like quarterbacks just overrated across the board on ESPN. You can still find some decent values. An example of this is if we look at another elite level quarterback option and going over and taking a peek at Josh Allen in ESPN is getting drafted at pick 26. Whereas if you're going to look at where he's going on Sleeper, there on Sleeper, he goes at pick 20. On Yahoo, he goes at pick 35. So on every other draft platform, Josh Allen's actually the quarterback one in fantasy, whereas ESPN Mahomes is just way more expensive. Now, what's very interesting is looking at this continued trend in these ESPN drafts, what you're finding is the quarterbacks that don't run the ball, those are the guys that are overpriced. I mean, our next quarterback that we need to talk about here will be Joe Burrow. I mean, obviously, Burrow looks to be set up to crush from a real life NFL perspective this season. Right now, he's at the top of the league almost in MVP odds. If you look at what sportsbooks are saying with the total points projection for Cincinnati this year, they currently have the Cincinnati Bengals as a top 5 offense overall. So personally, when I'm drafting on Underdog, I've been taking a ton of Joe Burrow. There he's about pick 90. Now I know Underdog's not the best example comparing to ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, just because Underdog's best ball. But even if we look at what you have with ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, on Sleeper and Yahoo, Joe Burrow goes in round 6 with an ADP of 63 and 65. Whereas if you're drafting on ESPN, there Joe Burrow goes at the very beginning of the 5th round at pick 52. Now, this is a continued trend where it looks like ESPN drafters aren't identifying how important rushing upside is to the quarterback position. So what I really want to illustrate here is just some very basic math. Now, this is primarily going to be for leagues where you're getting 4 points per passing touchdown and 1 point per 25 passing yards. Whereas obviously you're going to be getting 1 point per 10 rushing yards and 6 points per rushing touchdown. So if we go ahead and if we just pull up some of the quarterbacks that were at the top of fantasy last year and some of the guys that are very expensive, like an example is if you go over and look at Underdog drafts, right now, Jaden Daniels and Anthony Richardson are extremely expensive, even though they've never proven anything at the NFL level, but just knowing the true upside that they have rushing the football. Like right now, if we look at the quarterbacks that were at the top of fantasy last year, the QB1 was Josh Allen. Now, if you're looking at Josh Allen from a passing yardage perspective, he's still pretty good. He's QB4 there in that category. If you're looking at Josh Allen from a passing touchdown perspective, there he's QB5. But what made him by far and away the best quarterback in fantasy, I mean, scoring almost 40 points more than the next QB2 is the fact that if you're looking at his rushing statistics, he had 15 rushing touchdowns and 524 rushing yards. So let me just get out a little calculator here. If you have 15 rushing touchdowns plus 524 rushing yards, you're getting from that rushing quarterback an additional 142 points just on the ground in fantasy. And if you look at what that equates to from a passing yardage perspective, that's an additional 3,500 passing yards if you're playing in a league where you get 1 point per 25 passing yards. So it looks like on ESPN, the guys that are getting pushed up too much at quarterback, that is, are the guys that don't have the rushing upside, where fantasy drafters on this platform, it appears, don't really understand the importance of that. I mean, our next guy here, Aaron Rodgers, goes at pick 119 on ESPN. So he's going inside the top 10 rounds. Whereas if you look at Underdog, he's pick 160. If you look at Sleeper, he's pick 138. If you look at Yahoo, he's pick 134. And I would make an argument that Rodgers falls into a range in your regular redraft league that this isn't really someone you need to be taking at all. I mean, I would make the argument that there are going to be a lot of quarterbacks that look similar to him off the waiver wire. If you wanted to take him as your quarterback too, sure, do so at the end of the draft if you take 2 late guys and just play the matchups between them. But to go through and take him in the middle rounds, it just simply doesn't make sense. Now let's go over to the next position here. Now, I don't want to just say blanketly, oh, you cannot draft Isaiah Pacheco. Now, I will say Isaiah Pacheco is much more expensive on ESPN than he is otherwise. Pacheco goes to pick 17. So in the middle of the second round to the top of the second round in your ESPN draft. Yahoo, he goes to pick 20. Sleeper, he goes pick 31. And then on Underdog, he goes pick 38. Now, full transparency, looking at the Underdog ADP here, not going to be super valuable when you're just looking at the overall ADP, because Underdog's best ball, you are going to have wide receivers pushed up dramatically. Running backs are going to be devalued significantly. So really, if you're looking at our 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet and you look at the color coding that we've done to illustrate where the best platform to draft a player is and where you maybe want to avoid them, we are really just focusing on Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN. Those are your traditional redraft formats. Now, I will say, I freaking love drafting on Underdog. By far and away, my favorite place to draft. Their best ball, so it's no time commitment at all during the season. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. It's how I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And of course, if you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy, you'll get my 2024 rankings, my 2024 draft guide. You'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. And you'll get our 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet that we are using to make this video. Last but not least, you also get a Christian McCaffrey special pick on more than less than half a total yard. Week 1 against the Jets. Now, if you do want to get in an Underdog draft, you do need to be in one of these states, but you can see the map right there. But looking at Pacheco, just with the redraft formats, if you're drafting on Sleeper, you're going to be getting him in the middle of round 3, whereas Pacheco's going to be going in the middle of round 2 on ESPN. Now, Pacheco, phenomenal profile. The departure of Jerick McKinnon looks like he is going to take a third down role. And I don't want to tell you that you can't draft Isaiah Pacheco in your ESPN draft, because if you do look at the middle of the second round through the middle of the third round, it is really one big flat tier. So even if Pacheco's the most expensive on ESPN, I think it's okay if you want to take him there. Now, going over to a running back that I would not advise you taking in your ESPN draft is going over and looking at James Cook. James Cook goes at pick 45 on Yahoo. That's going to be the end of the 4th round. He goes at pick 43 on Sleeper, the middle of the 4th round, and he goes at pick 29 on ESPN. So you'd have to take James Cook in the middle of the 3rd. And if we just go through and look at some other players that are kind of in this range, I mean, you can find phenomenal values even at the running back position here. Whereas if you're going to go ahead, if you're going to look at like Devon Achane goes at pick 30 on ESPN. Achane and James Cook go pretty much back to back at the moment, whereas Achane on every other platform is significantly more expensive than James Cook. That's why this ADP consensus cheat sheet is so damn valuable. That way you can actually point things out like this. Whereas James Cook, he does have some pretty serious issues in that Josh Allen's going to take a ton of rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen's not going to have a super high checkdown rate. And the addition of Ray Davis may actually kind of cannibalize some of these red zone opportunities for James Cook on top of the ones that Josh Allen will take. So I would just definitely recommend avoiding James Cook in round 3. Now, of course, if he were to fall like, I don't know, say 10, 15 picks past ADP, then at that point, you can feel comfortable taking him. It's just so hard to grab him here. And in Underdog right now, he goes at the end of the 5th round. But like I said, that is different. Now, going over to our next running back, Alvin Kamara, also super freaking expensive. Where right now on Underdog, Kamara's a 7th round pick. In Sleeper leagues, Kamara goes in round 5. Yahoo leagues, Kamara goes in round 5. Whereas ESPN, the man goes in round 3. If you're looking at Alvin Kamara, Condre Miller is banged up. That maybe gives him a little bit of a higher ceiling. But you have Jamal there. I don't think Kamara should be a running back that at this point of his NFL career projects out to see 20 touches every single week. You also have Taysom Hill, who is going to be a guy in the red zone that is used in so many different ways that you have to worry about him taking away touchdowns from Alvin Kamara. So to take Kamara inside the first 3 rounds, going into his age 30 season with these pieces potentially stealing work and at the same time in a bad offense, it just makes no sense to draft him in round 3 on ESPN. Whereas you're going to get a much better value if you're like on Yahoo taking him at the 5-6 turn. Now, Jonathan Brooks is a running back that's very interesting. And I've already mentioned with Brooks that there are a few instances where I think he makes a ton of sense. And those instances are if you're able to take him and immediately throw him on your IR, which I've actually seen that. People have been coming out and telling me in the live stream, Mason, I was able to get Jonathan Brooks in the double-digit rounds. I just immediately put him on my IR and I picked up another player off the waiver wire. And that's a phenomenal move. And I think that's a very high upside move for the long term. But the issue is in ESPN, Jonathan Brooks goes around 7. Yahoo, he has an ADP of 107. Sleeper, he has an ADP of 87. Underdog is an ADP of 92. And I'd make the argument that on Underdog, where you're really just incentivized to chase upside for weeks 15, 16, 17 for those massive tournaments where you're trying to take down millions, I would probably rather prefer Jonathan Brooks in that format, not to mention that he is significantly cheaper. It would just be very difficult to take him in the ESPN drafts where you have to grab him in the middle rounds, where he is going to be limiting you in that there should be a ton of other, very exciting players around that range. Like we said, he has an ADP of 78. Chris Godwin on ESPN has an ADP of 75. Kyler Murray has an ADP of 76. James Conner, ADP of 70. Terry McLaurin, ADP of 79. So I think taking Brooks there is probably a little too aggressive. At first I was thinking, okay, maybe just running backs are more valuable on ESPN than they are on other platforms. But then we actually saw these other positions, and you can find instances of guys being severely overrated here. So like I already discussed at the top of the video, I don't really like using Underdog in the ADP comparisons just because Underdog wide receivers are going to be valued so much higher than they are in your regular redraft league. So I really do like comparing like ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper to each other. But what's very funny is Michael Pittman Jr. is an example of a wide receiver that is valued significantly higher in ESPN drafts than he even is on Underdog, than he is on Sleeper, than he is in Yahoo. Michael Pittman Jr. goes to the 2-3 turn in your ESPN draft. There are some people crazy enough to take Pittman at the end of the second round. This is despite, if you look at this offense, Anthony Richardson projecting to more so be a low volume passer. Anthony Richardson himself can still be a great NFL quarterback, a phenomenal fantasy asset based off the rushing element that he brings to this offense, but that doesn't really benefit Michael Pittman Jr. in any way. Whereas if you're drafting on Sleeper, you get Pittman in the 4th round. If you're drafting on Yahoo, you get him in the middle of the 3rd. If you get him on Underdog, you get him at the 3-4 turn, where wide receivers are significantly more expensive. So to be honest with you, I would personally say that in your regular redraft league, if you especially only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, and looking at some of these values later on, where like I already discussed, you can get T. Higgins at pick 62. I think Pittman and Higgins should be ranked almost neck and neck with each other. However, in ESPN drafts, T. Higgins is around 6th pick, and Michael Pittman Jr. is going at the 2-3 turn. So for the love of God, don't be taking Pittman. Looking at Calvin Ridley in my rankings has been a riser, primarily just due to the DeAndre Hopkins injury that you had. But Calvin Ridley is a guy that is in the range where if you're drafting on Underdog, you're going to have to pay up for him. Like I said, Underdog is different. Wide receivers are extremely valuable. But in Yahoo and Sleeper, you get a decent value on him. There, he's going at pick 80. He's going at pick 85, which in my mind feels like a phenomenal price. If you can get Calvin Ridley in the 80s, I think this is a wide receiver that, based on the upside that Will Levis potentially possesses, especially with this coaching staff saying that they want to air the ball out, even though Ridley disappointed last year, and now he technically does have a quarterback downgrade, he gets paid so much money. There's not much competition here. In the 80s, phenomenal pick. But going over and looking at what you have on ESPN, there on the other hand, Calvin really goes to pick 65. So it's really funny is if you cross-reference this with that Underdog ADP and just look at wide receivers next to each other, right? Because if we look at wide receivers next to each other, that solves a lot of those issues. Calvin Ridley goes to pick 57. Jaden Reed goes to pick 59. These are 2 guys that go pretty much neck and neck, where drafters on Underdog are having to pick between the 2 of them. Whereas if you look at Jaden Reed on ESPN, Jaden Reed goes to pick 88. He goes 2 to 3 rounds after Calvin Ridley. So I'd highly recommend avoiding Ridley in the middle rounds. I think you have better wide receiver values, or maybe instead you want to go with a running back. Maybe you want David Montgomery if you missed out on a running back early. Maybe you want a wide receiver like T. Higgins, George Pickens. Hell, you could even go with the wide receiver just 1 round earlier in Zay Flowers or Amari Cooper or Tank Dell. Just this range where Ridley goes doesn't make sense to take him. Now, I love getting the elite tight end in drafts this year. I am highly advocating for it, especially where I've been doing all these Underdog drafts, right? And I've already discussed there's Sam Laporta's going in the 4th. Travis Kelce's going in the 4th. And I do think that in that price point, you can make an argument that the tight ends outscore the wide receivers that are going next to them. On ESPN, the tight ends are pretty damn expensive. Now, of course, I still potentially like getting an elite tight end. I don't think you can take Travis Kelce, though. Because if you look at Kelce, there he has an ADP of 19. He's going in the middle of the 2nd round. Yahoo, Sleeper, both ADPs have picked 27. So there he's going in the middle of the 3rd. On Underdog, he's going in the 4th round. So to just take this guy in the 2nd doesn't make sense. But I do like getting an elite tight end. So if we look at our other options, Mark Andrews is dealing with the same issue. Mark Andrews here goes at the very beginning of the 4th. He has an ADP of 40. If you're drafting on Yahoo, you can get him in the middle of the 5th. If you're drafting it on Sleeper, you can get him at the beginning of the 5th, the end of the 4th. And then the same thing on Underdog. You can get him at the beginning of the 5th, the late 4th. Going over and looking at the same issue that we have with Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is significantly more expensive here, where Evan Ingram has an ADP of pick 57 on ESPN. Whereas if you're drafting on Yahoo, you can get him at 91. You get him 3-4 rounds later on Yahoo Fantasy. So there, I think it makes a lot of sense to pivot off of Evan Ingram. And then looking at David Njoku, it's the same story. David Njoku, ADP 73 on ESPN, whereas on Yahoo, he's picked 96. So it looks like these tight ends almost across the board are more expensive than they are otherwise. Now, if we're going to be looking at some potential tight end options that you could have that are similarly priced, say you want to go with an early tight end, you don't want to stream the position during the year. Sam Laporta could be someone that you take at the 2-3 turn in your ESPN draft, where he also goes at the 2-3 turn on Sleeper Yahoo. Now, I'll say he goes in round 4 on Underdog draft, so he's one of my most drafted players at the moment. Just absolutely love that price. Going over and looking at someone like Kyle Pitts, I'm not like all in on Pitts, but on Sleeper, he's selected a pick 58. On ESPN, he selected a pick 60. So that does seem like somewhat of a fair price point. Going over and looking at Trey McBride, Trey McBride's actually cheaper in ESPN drafts than he is on Underdog, Sleeper, Yahoo. He's actually a value on ESPN going at pick 50. So I think if you're in an ESPN format, you're more likely than not going to be looking at the Laporta, McBride, Pitts, and potentially Kincaid as well, where you can get Kincaid in the middle of round 5. And I do really like that price point. But I hope this video was able to help you out if you have an ESPN draft this year. And of course, if you want to see this for other platforms, just let me know in the comment section. I'll be very happy to get it out for you, because I do think it's very important to just avoid these landmines, because I find myself in positions where I go, this guy's fallen 5, he's fallen 10 picks past ADP. He must be a good value. And then you look and it's like, okay, it's just the ESPN ADP is messed up. Oh, it's just the Yahoo ADP is messed up. It's just the Underdog ADP is messed up. But of course, if you want to get in a draft with me as well, I'm going to be drafting every single night on this live stream. Underdog's actually hosting flock tournaments every Monday and Thursday night as well, which I am very excited about. But regardless, if you want to get in a flock tournament with me or just any tournament with me on Underdog, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. If you use code FLOCK, you're going to get my 2024 draft guide, 2024 rankings, 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet, all 3 of which will be updated every Sunday for you until the season starts. And you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. Plus, you'll get that Christian McCaffrey special pick'em more than less than half a total yard for week 1 as well. But lastly, real quick, Flock meetup, Austin, Texas, August 22nd. Should be a ton of fun. If you want to get a ticket, flockfantasy.store. Looking forward to hanging out with all of y'all. But much love, really do appreciate you, and really hope I get to draft with you in the live stream later tonight.